Black Desert Online is a Korean MMORPG made by Pearl Abyss, and in this video, I'm going to be covering some information about the game, my personal pros and cons list, and what type of player I think will and will not enjoy Black Desert. My goal is that by the end of this video, you will know if this is a game that you should be giving a shot this year. And I will say that BDO is definitely a tough game to get into as a new player if you're coming from a traditionally Western MMO. So do expect some more beginner guides on the channel soon. I do have some from when I played last year, and they're still completely relevant, but I do plan on making some additional ones in the upcoming weeks, so definitely keep your eyes out for those. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Black Desert Online is buy to play. Packages start at as cheap as like $8 to $10, but they often do free game giveaways for the game or periods where you can get the game for free. So definitely keep an eye on that for you to be able to get into the game for no cost. BDO is set in a high fantasy universe, and the game is completely sandbox. So you can do basically whatever you want, whenever you want, because the sandbox is a lot of freedom and it always feels like there's something to do. BDO has action combat, but honestly, it plays more like a fighting game. That's typically one thing that I always tell people when they're like, you know, how is the combat? The combat is one of the best combat systems I've ever played with, and I'm obviously going to discuss that more in my pro section. But like I said, it plays more like a fighting game than like a traditional MMO, I would say. Now, there's technically no level cap in the game. Progression is nearly infinite. Now, you will hit soft caps, though, at about level 62, where the time to level up starts to get incredibly high. But as long as you're doing something to gain experience, you'll always be progressing your character in some way. The game now has 22 different classes in the game, and they're constantly coming out with new ones, and the classes are gender locked. Now, the way that general class progression works is that you're going to start your class with your main skills, and when you hit level 56, you're going to unlock something called an awakening skill line, which gives you a secondary weapon and a whole new skill tree to place skill points in, which gives you access to a brand new set of passive and active skills. However, if you really did enjoy your base skills and you really don't want to use that new awakened playstyle, you could choose to instead empower your base skills through the succession skill tree and use kind of what you were doing when you were leveling up. BDO also has very in-depth crafting professions in this game, which are called life skills. All the life skills are very unique in their own way, and the way they're designed really gives them a very old-school MMO kind of feeling. The housing system in BDO is also a pretty intricate system. I would say, though, currently, player housing is a bit more limited compared to other MMOs, but there are plans to expand it. You do have the ability to purchase a ton of various houses in whatever city you want, and the houses can serve different purposes. You can use them to unlock additional bank storage, use them as a personal residence where you can put crafting tables and furnish the house to your liking, or you can turn them into workshops for your workers to craft items for you. But as I did say, Pearl Abyss will be updating housing later in 2021, adding the ability for players to purchase mansions that are far more spacious than the current houses available, and will allow you to design both the interior and the exterior of the house however you'd like. BDO also has a worker system that has NPC workers gather resources for you while you play. The system has a bit of a mobile game kind of feel to it, where you spend energy per character to hire workers, which replenish over time, or you can use an energy potion to restore it, and then you can send these workers to nodes around the map to basically gather items for you, or you can send them to craft items in a house that you dedicate for NPC crafting. Speaking of nodes, that segues us into that system. A node is simply a place that you discover on the map that has a node manager. So for example, if I go to this farm here, I was able to talk to the node manager, and then as you can see on the map, I've unlocked the node. I can then invest a different currency called contribution points, which is a type of point that you earn from various in-game activities, to unlock the ability to send a worker to that node, assuming that I have a different node connected to it. And like I said, expend energy, send the worker to the node, and then the worker will gather materials from that node for me and then bring them back to the bank of the town from wherever that worker was hired. So TLDR is that you hire workers, you send them to places on the map, you spend different types of currency to basically do these things, and they farm materials for you. Now, I just wanted to give a quick overview of this system because it is a big part of the game, but I do have a complete beginner guide to this type of system on my channel if you do want to learn more about it, and I'll link that in the description below. BDO also has no traditional PvE. There aren't any raids or dungeons currently. There's one dungeon-like instance that's like a horde mode type of deal, and there are plans to add an open world co-op dungeon later in 2021, but otherwise PvE content is mostly mob grinding and world bosses. On the other hand, the game has a ton of PvP options, such as node wards, which are basically hold and defend the point where you fight against other guilds, team deathmatch, open world PvP, guild v guild, and more. Do note that the open world PvP, though, is not opt-in. It is on all the time. Some areas are safe zones, but if you're in a combat zone, anyone can attack you. Now, this doesn't mean that players are just going to farm you left and right. If a really high geared player attacks a less geared player, they lose something called karma, which can eventually make them attack on sight by guards in towns, and they have to stop attacking players and actually grind mobs to put them back in good standing with the world. Also, there's a lot of guild politics behind world PvP, and arguments and fights and wars can get started by one guild continually attacking another, so you won't have to overly worry about getting harassed unless you're encroaching on someone's grind spot. Also, new players, don't worry. When you start, you'll be able to access servers for a few weeks where world PvP is disabled to give you time to learn the game and progress your character. Now, do note that the game does not run off a mega server system, so if someone is just deciding to be rude and just keeps unprovokingly killing you, you can just freely change realms and go on to a different one and continue doing what you're doing. Now, there are also plans to add a bounty system later in 2021. So if someone's harassing you and you feel that you need additional help and your guild's not available, you could always call a sheriff to help assist you. But Pearl Abyss is still kind of fleshing out what they want with this system, and so that's kind of like all the details we have on it right now. Also, if you do never want a PvP, you can actually lock your character at level 49 since PvP is not enabled for characters below level 50. Pearl Abyss has also mentioned that they're planning to add some new PvP game modes in 2021 called 10v10 Crews, with the goal of creating a more competitive PvP environment. Options for these game modes may include things like Capture the Flag, a mini Siege War, and there are plans to potentially add a ranking system with tournaments even being possible. The game is focused primarily, though, on character progression. Since there's no traditional PvE, the main focus is on PvP, character progression via leveling and gearing, and gold making via life skills or grinding mobs. I mentioned guilds earlier. The game has a very in-depth guild system. Guilds have a lot of meeting in BDO. You can declare war on guilds. Members get paid for being in a guild based on an agreed upon contract between the guildie and the guildmaster. You can run guild quests, and one of the PvP modes, Castle Siege, allows you to fight for ownership of towns against other guilds. Guilds do take a lot more management in this game, though, due to the dues and contract system, so do look into it a bit more if you are thinking about becoming a GM. Gear in Black Desert has no level and instead has attack power and defense power ratings on the gear, as well as some other secondary bonuses like accuracy, evasion, damage reduction, etc. This gear can be enhanced, though, to increase the potency of the bonuses on the gear. The game also does have a central auction house, which can be basically accessed from anywhere in the world by just hitting escape and clicking the marketplace. There is no fast travel in the game. Keep that in mind. Thankfully, there is a horse, though, that you do get from the main quest line, and you can get some very fast horses that allow you to travel from point A to point B really quickly. There's an in-depth pet system. Pets help you auto loot and have a ton of different perks, tiers, etc., and you do get a few from the main quest line to help you get started. There is also an in-depth mount system. There's different horse tiers, types, skills for the horses, gear for the horses. You can breed the horses to create new and better horses. It's a lot to do with this system, and like everything else in BDO, there's a lot of depth to it. The game also does have sailing, so you can explore the open seas to fish, trade, hunt sea monsters, and have your own crew of NPCs even join you. Now, moving into the pros of the game, my first one is that it is a sandbox game, so there is a lot of freedom. Always feels like there is something to do. My biggest pro, of course, as is most people's, is the combat. BDO has one of the best MMO combat systems I have ever played, and it is what makes the game so enjoyable. The combat feels fluid, the spell effects and audio feel impactful, and BDO is famed for its combat experience, and that reputation does hold true. The game does have really beautiful graphics with an awesome photo mode. It has a very it has a bit of an old school MMO feel, I would say. There's no fast travel, engaging life skills. You need to drink water in the desert during the day to keep cool and tea at night to keep warm. You have to feed your horses, pets, and workers. You need to chain your character's breath by running to increase your stamina and increase strength by carrying heavy things around. BDO has a lot of old school MMO elements to it, and I think a lot of players who enjoy that stuff will really like it. The game also has a solid main quest. Main quest is vastly improved nowadays from the way that it used to be way back when. Main quest and suggested quests from the Black Spirit, who is basically your guide for the main quest line and acts as an interface for certain systems, really help you a lot in your early journey. They help you learn about the in-game world, level quickly, and give you a ton of free stuff along the way. There are traditional side quests that give some solid experience, so if you want to level up to nearly the soft cap by just doing quests, you can absolutely do that. You do not need to feel forced to grind early on, and with a certain in-game item, the experience gained from quests is increased by quite a bit, allowing you to quest your way successfully to 61. There are tons of events and free rewards in BDO. I mean, since I've even come back to BDO, they've had already a ton of events and tons of free stuff given up. And like literally when I first came back to BDO, I had to spend like 2.5 hours just going through all the free stuff I had waiting on my account. They give you a ton for just even logging in and playing the game. Also, most gear in the game is not bind on pickup, which means that if you have a piece of gear, when you're done with that piece of gear, you could actually resell it on the marketplace and recoup some of your original investment. BDO does have a massive class selection. As I mentioned earlier, there are 22 classes, and the classes have Succession and Awakening lines, so the game has a ton of playstyle options to choose from. Even though the classes are gender locked, it's not entirely the end of the world sometimes, because there are, oftentimes a different class that's really similar to the one class, just the other gender. Like using the Witch and Wizard, for example, the classes play and are incredibly similar, but one is female and one is male. Now, another pro for me is that there's a huge focus on PvP. For a lot of people, this can be a con, but for me, it's a pro. Not many of the current MMOs out there have a huge PvP focus, and BDO PvP is a huge part of the game. So combined with the combat system, it makes for a really great experience. You can also always be doing something in BDO, even while you're AFK. You can set your character up to fish, process items, train breath or strength, gain experience, cook, or do a bunch of other things while you're away from your computer. Also, you can thankfully minimize BDO to your system tray during that time to reduce the amount of stress that it puts on your PC's resources. BDO also has added a new feature called season servers to the game, which basically act as a vehicle for new players to catch up, offering accelerated experience gains and tons of rewards. And in addition, BDO has also greatly improved the in-game's catch-up mechanics, making it easier than ever before for a new player to get started in BDO. They've added a new gear that you get through the main questline, which is called Naru gear. And as you improve that gear to the top rank, you have a very easy time improving that gear because the probability of improving it is higher. When you get that to the top rank, you can exchange it at a NPC that can be found at any stable called Fugar for some gear, which is called Narchilian gear. And Narchilian gear is a really, really, really solid set of gear to get yourself started. The top rank of gear in this game is called Pen. The second is called Tet. And the third is called Try. And the gear that you get once you fully improve this Narchilian gear, you improve the Naru gear from the main quest line, and you exchange it at Fugar to get this Narchilian gear, it's basically like Try 0.5. So it gives you a really, really solid set of starting gear for you to get into the end game grinding and start working towards your full end game gear loadout. Now, of course, guys, it's easy to talk about how great a game is, but we also do have to discuss the cons and the things that you really need to watch out for when you start playing. Now, my first con was also my first pro. It's a sandbox game. Because there is a lot of freedom and it always feels like there's something to do, it can feel really overwhelming for new players who don't know what they're doing. I know the first week that I played BDO way back last year, I basically logged off every single day with a headache because of how much information I felt was being thrown at me and realizing the gravity behind how many systems I would need to work on. This can be mitigated by setting short and long-term goals for yourself. But, there's definitely an overwhelming feeling that comes over you when you start the game as a new player. Performance-wise, the game runs well overall, as long as you adjust the graphical settings to your system's capabilities. The biggest issue that I've noticed with BDO is it has a lot of graphical pop-ins. Now, these can definitely ruin some immersion where people and objects just pop into your screen out of nowhere. Changing your graphic settings can help a bit, but it's a well-known issue that the game does suffer from. BDO is, of course, very grindy. I've had people ask me, can I play this game and not grind in some way? And the answer is no. Some people don't mind the grind. Other people do mind it. But the game is a Korean MMO after all. And if you don't like grinding, you're not going to like BDO. Whether you're grinding life skills, whether or not you're grinding mobs for experience or silver, you're going to be grinding something. And if you don't like grinding, I would not play the game, personally. My next con is that gear enhancement in this game. Totally RNG. There are fail stacks, aka a failure protection. The system definitely would require its own video to explain, but a quick and dirty version of that is that you build failure protection for an item enhancement when you fail to actually enhance the item, and those stacks get consumed on successful enhancement. Now, with that being said, it's not like you just build fail stacks and nothing happens to the original item. When you fail to upgrade an item past a certain point, it can actually downgrade an enhancement value. And in case of accessories, it can just be destroyed altogether. Certain items can help prevent this, but they can be very, very expensive. If you don't like this enhancement system, because like I said, you know, in BDO, gear does not really have a level, and the gear, basically what makes gear like really powerful is the enhancement value. The higher the enhancement value, the better the stats on the gear piece are. You can totally avoid the system though, the actual manually enhancing the gear if you want to, by just purchasing whatever upgrades you want directly off the market trader. Like for example, let's say you have a tri weapon and you want a tet weapon. Instead of trying to enhance that tri weapon to tet, you can just straight up buy a tet weapon and then sell your tri weapon. But keep in mind, those upgrades are very expensive. So for gear upgrades, you basically have two choices. You can either save up and spend a boatload of money to upgrade your gear, or brave the RNG and try to go through enhancement. There's also no traditional trading between players. Most things need to go through the marketplace, and very few things can go directly from player to player. This is to help prevent things like gear boosting, so I do get it, but it could definitely be a con and a bit weird for new players when they do join. Another con is the gender lock classes. As I did explain earlier, not a huge deal in the case of some classes, but for others, you are totally locked into the gender that class is. Another con that I have is no low-geared queuable PvP. Unfortunately, the only queuable PvP mode has no gear cap, so as a new player, you're limited to this thing called Tier 1 Node Wars, which are basically like guild v guild wars out in the world that have caps on the amount of attack power and defense power that is essentially effective for each player. So it allows newer players to play and be competitive as long as they're, you know, relatively close to those caps. But those only happen at certain times of the day, and the only queuable option that you can just do at any time has no caps. So as a new player, you're just going to get your face punched in by people that are fully geared. The only other option is you can create a trial character, which is fully geared and, you know, a fully geared and leveled character to practice in battle arena. But, you know, those are just like, if anybody's there, you can fight them. But it's not like a queuable thing like a team deathmatch or anything else. Personally, I do think BDO would benefit a lot from taking its queuable PvP mode and creating a second lower tier that has those caps like on your attack power and defense power, similarly to how I described that the Tier 1 Node Wars have. This would allow newer players to PvP outside of those scheduled times and get some practice in so that they can be more effective and have more fun when it comes time for those guild wars. There's also no traditional endgame PvE. This personally isn't really a con for me as I'm more of a PvP-oriented player, but I do need to mention it here in the cons because I do know it's going to be a huge turnoff for a lot of people. BDO doesn't have the traditional, you know, dungeons and raids, so if you're a fan of doing that, and that's the main thing you enjoy doing, I wouldn't really recommend getting into Black Desert. Like I did mention earlier, they are going to be adding a co-op dungeon later this year. I still don't think it's going to be entirely enough to scratch the itch of people who do like traditional raiding. Maybe later on, as more of these are added and there's more of them to do, but for now, I really wouldn't say it's enough for a traditional PvE player to want to get into the game. Now, the next thing that I do want to discuss separately from the pros and cons is the pay to win. This is a bit of a controversial topic when it comes to the game, and I just want to preface this by this is just my opinion. I think there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to BDO being paid to win, because in my opinion, the game really isn't. I would categorize it as more of pay to convenience, as many of the current buy-to-play MMOs are. Some of the items in the Pearl shop, which is this game's microtransaction shop, can definitely help you on your adventures with making certain things more convenient, but they're by no means required. And if you spend a normal amount of money in the cash shop that you'd spend on any other game you'd play, you're going to be very well off. Because if you do think about it, other buy-to-play MMOs, right? They have their premium sub model. They have an expansion or a chapter or whatever term they use that comes out every single year. So you're spending money on those. But with BDO, you buy the game, you have it. That's it. You have all future updates. You have everything. So if you were to even just take the money that you were to invest in a new chapter or an expansion or something and put that into pearls, you will be well off after maybe only like 1 to 2 purchases. It's really not that bad in my opinion. And also many things that you can get off the Pearl shop, you can buy with the game's in-game currency, which is called silver. And so if you don't want to spend real money, you can use silver. Now I know someone is going to run to the comments though, shouting, well, Dots Gaming, you can buy and sell costumes with real money, sell those for silver, which allows you to buy gear, therefore pay to win, get dunked on. But my rebuttal to that is that while technically, yes, that is the case, unless money is literally not an object to you, you will not be spending the money required to get gear. I did the math on my stream, and it literally costs like $1,500 to sell enough costumes for like a cheap piece of max enhanced gear. And once you start getting into the more expensive pieces, like a full set of max enhanced gear will cost you at least 6 figures. So unless you just have hundreds of thousands of dollars to drop on Black Desert Online, game is not really pay to win. Now, my final section, guys, is the should you play section. Now, if you are a raider or a dungeon diver, I would say you want to avoid the game. There's no traditional raids or dungeons, so the game's PvE side is definitely lacking. And although they are going to be adding some things into it, I still don't think it is enough to scratch the itch that somebody who primarily identifies as a raider would be looking for. Now, if you are a PvPer, I would 100% get into BDO. BDO's main endgame focus is on PvP. It'll take you some time to get to the point where you're geared enough to hop into PvP, but once you're there, it's super fun and an engaging experience. Tier 1 node wars, like I mentioned earlier, are a great experience for newer players because it doesn't take that long to get into them compared to the game's endgame PvP because of those attack power and defense power and health caps that I mentioned earlier. So this gives new or returning players more of an equal footing against their opponents while they're fighting in this. I do hope to see BDO add kind of like a queuable type of mode still with PvP to with these types of caps so that new players can play outside of the distinct node war times, but we'll have to see what the future holds. If you are a solo player, I would say absolutely. You can do a ton in Black Desert totally by yourself between grinding and life skills and questing, etc. There's a ton to do in the game by yourself. And granted, the quests really aren't anything to write home about. They're not as good as some of the other games, but, you know, they're not terrible. The world design is also really gorgeous, and it's really easy to get lost in the universe with all of the in-depth systems in the game, the traditional MMO feel, and how much there really is to do. And speaking of life skills, if you're into crafting, 100% I would recommend BDO. The game has some of the most in-depth crafting of any MMO I've ever played, and it's definitely worth it. Now, if you're a housing person at the moment, I would say no. The housing in the game, it's there, it's okay, but it's nothing to write home about. Now, with the upcoming mansion system, however, that does sound like it's going to be a huge improvement to the game's in-game housing system. But the current housing system is limited compared to other MMOs out there. So I'd wait to see until that system comes out and see what that really looks like and how that is fleshed out to help you decide if whether or not BDO is going to be a good game for you. But guys, my overall impression of BDO is a positive one. I've just gotten back into the game myself recently. I've been playing it a lot more, and I've been having a great time with it. And I do think unless you're a hardcore raider or a dungeon diver, it's absolutely worth giving a try. You can get the game really cheap, and there's really no harm in giving it a shot. The game can seem overwhelming at first, but be sure to subscribe to my channel as to do, like I said, plan on putting out a ton of beginner and new player guides in the upcoming weeks to help you get started on your adventures in BDO. But before I head out for the day, I do just want to give you a piece of advice if you're going to be getting into BDO. Take it slow. The game is very different than traditional Western MMOs. There's a lot to do and a lot of systems to learn and get used to. You're not going to be max level, killing everybody with max ranked gear in a month. It's going to take time. So take things one thing at a time, set short-term and long-term goals for yourself, and play at your own pace. And if you do that, I think you're going to have a great time with BDO. But if you try to tackle everything at once, you're going to greatly increase your odds of burning out. But guys, with that being said, that is going to be it for me today. Is Black Desert Online worth it in 2021? Hopefully this did help you decide if that is the case. And if you guys did like this video, I would appreciate if you left a like on it. If you want to, mention anything about BDO to anybody who's thinking about getting into it, feel free to leave a comment below. And guys, for more Black Desert as well as other MMORPG content here on the Dots Gaming YouTube channel, please hit that sub button as well as hit the bell to keep those notifications on. So thank you all so much for stopping by today. I do very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.